slippery glass. This just happened. It wasn't a search or anything like that. I live alone, and just now I was filling the bathtub with water and getting in. In my bathroom, there is a call button, and when you press it, an announcement plays in the kitchen. Since I live alone, I don't usually press it, but just now I pressed it, and on the other side of the frosted glass of the bathroom door, a woman appeared without any legs, wearing what looked to be a floral dress. I was so scared I couldn't move. And then the woman pressed her hand, with only her pinky finger raised, against the glass. There was no sound, but I could hear the glass. For some reason I thought that she might not have noticed me, so I desperately held my breath. At that moment, I was thinking that it might not be a ghost, but a robber. After about 3 minutes, the woman left the door without making a sound. However, I was so scared that I couldn't leave the bathroom for about an hour. Eventually, I realized I couldn't stay there forever, so I gathered my courage and left the bathroom. I looked around the house, but there was no one there. Now, I'm too scared to be at home, so I'm at a nearby convenience store. I'm frightened and don't want to go back to my room. I wonder if the hand gesture with just the pinky finger raised was some kind of message. I don't think it was an intruder. All the doors were locked, and the bathroom door was locked, but I could see her clearly through the frosted glass. Is there any good solution? Does anyone know about simple female spirit methods or cases like this? Has anyone experienced something similar? Dear Kuna, my grandfather, who lives in the countryside, has no bones in the joints of his left pinky finger. When you pinch it, it gets squashed and can bend at any angle. When I was little, I was amazed by this and said, "Grandpa, you're amazing. Why? Why?" and was so excited. Then my grandfather said with a smile, "Oh, you're so cute, Grandpa. You're so weak." I would joke about it and say things like that, but he told me the real reason when I was about to enter elementary school. The following is what my grandfather told me. There is an old shrine on top of the mountain in this village, right? That is what they call a shrine. Gora Shrine enshrines a real person who was suspected of being a ghost and killed. And it is said that the origin of the Gora faith is the faith in volume. In other words, it is a shrine to keep the person calm so that he does not become a curse god. The name of the god who lives in this village is Marumaru. Forget the Marumaru part. It was a long name, something like Mara, but we old folks call him Kuna-sama. It is said that Kuna-sama sometimes comes down to the village in the shape of a snake or a woman. For this reason, snakes are feared as incarnations of gods in this village, and it is said that they must never be killed. Kushi-sama is also worshipped as a god who controls bones, and it is said that if pregnant women or small children visit the shrine, the children will grow up to be strong. However, the problem is that Kuna-sama has a violent personality. Long ago, Kuna-sama was notorious in the village for being a reclusive son, and he would harass the house of a daughter who had been cold to him. However, it turned out to be a nasty act of harassment, where the snake was impaled alive on a branch and lined up in the daughter's garden. The daughter's family was pale-faced and trembling with rage at what they had done. They buried the snake in the garden, crying out in a pool of blood. A few days later, the man succumbed to his injuries. Every bone in his body began to creak and ache, and he lay in agony in his bed for the rest of the day. He cried out incomprehensible words that it hurt, and his bones were burning, and his parents desperately nursed him back to health. The man's body was indeed deformed and limp as if all of his bones had melted, and his head and arms were also deformed. The man was in such a state that he could not even lift himself up by himself. The doctors had never seen such a strange disease before and were scratching their heads, wondering if it might be a sign of something serious. On the fourth day, the man suddenly disappeared. His parents were puzzled because it was impossible for him to get up by himself, but they searched the nearby mountains and fields. They found it in the field of their daughter's house in Kuna. It was a strange object in the shape of their son, with its limbs bent in impossible directions, and from a distance, it looked like it was dancing. It was constantly moaning and squirming. They approached the sun-like thing with trepidation. The son's face, including the eyes and nose, was wrinkled and drooping, unable to resist gravity. His expression looked sad and like he was crying, probably due to his drooping eyes and mouth. Seeing this, the parents also went mad. It looks similar to the famous Kuna, but the German family doesn't know. By the way, in my grandfather's hometown, this phenomenon is called jiga and is feared as a curse from Kuna, and we were taught that it is something that should not be seen. So, he is a very frightening god, but my grandfather actually met the Kuna. That was when I was about the same age as you are now. That day, my friend Kanji and I went into the mountains together during the day to look for snakeskins. In this region, they are appreciated as a good way to perform gymnastics, and if you give them to adults, they sometimes give you food. We were so engrossed in looking for the skins that we unknowingly came to the torii gate of a shrine for spirits. We had been strictly told that children should never go near this place on their own, but we felt that we had already come to the bird's nest. We had to turn back slowly, and that's what we were saying. Then a woman approached me. She was not wearing the kind of work clothes that village women wear, but a whitish kimono that looked like a yukata. I was worried that I would be scolded for breaking my orders, so I whispered to the organizer, "This is bad. Either apologize sincerely or run away." "What are you talking about? Who's here?" The man looked around, squinted his eyes and tried to stare into the distance, but it seemed that only I could see the woman. Finally, she came close enough that I could make out her face, but something was wrong, and I realized that she was clearly from a different industry. The first thing that seemed strange was its eyes. Snake's eyes. Its small eyes were set apart on either side and were narrowly closed vertically, like the puncture wounds of a knife that is so characteristic of reptiles. Its accompanying flower was thin, with a small mouth and an overall slender appearance. I froze on the spot, like a frog stared at by a snake. "Hey, what's wrong? Let's go home," the kanji said, somehow sounding very far away. The woman blinked her snake eyes, and suddenly her long, thin limbs bent in impossible directions. She was bending her joints haphazardly, like a marionette with its strings cut, or like a rubber doll. The creepiest thing was that the woman tilted her head to the side, then continued to bend it until her head was completely upside down in front of her chest, a position that completely ignored the natural resistance of the human body. I didn't scream, but all the blood drained from my body and I couldn't stop trembling. As if to confirm my reaction, the woman grinned and looked at me with her upside-down face, asking if it was me. Her arms and legs were all bent and limp, and our faces were exactly at the same height. I was stupid, so I shook my head as hard as I could and yelled in a tearful voice that I couldn't see. The woman looked even more annoyed and narrowed her eyes, saying, "I can see it. You're such an insolent brat." My legs were shaking and my eyes were all wet with tears, and someone was saying something in kanji next to me, but I couldn't even hear what they were saying. I closed my eyes and apologized, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The woman then shook her whole body violently and reverted to her original appearance, resembling that of a human being. at the tip of her flower, and in my eyes. He smiled happily and said, "I'll come and pick you up tonight, so wait for me," stroking my left hand and mine. Then he returned a gentle kiss and walked back towards the shrine gate. I quickly went down the mountain with the organizer and told my family, who were working in the fields, about what had happened. As soon as my father and mother heard what I had said, their faces turned pale, and the shrine priest was called to our house. I told him in detail what I had just seen, and as expected, their faces turned grim, and they said in an angry tone, "Give me your left hand and take a look." When I handed my left hand, which had been caressed by the female spirit, to the priest, he pinched and pulled each of my 5 fingers one by one and carefully examined them, then took the tip of my pinky finger and said, "That's it," without changing his stern expression before letting go of my hand, thinking that I touched it myself. And sure enough, the part above the first joint of my pinky finger was soft and limp. I hadn't noticed until he said that, but what Bono had seen was definitely Kuna-sama. No one had seen him for the past 10 years, so I let my guard down. It seemed that he had taken a liking to this child. Even though I was young, I felt uncomfortable with the phrase favorite, but my father spoke for me. "What do you mean favored? If you incur Lord Kuna's wrath, won't you be turned into a jeka?" The Lord replied quietly, but in a clear voice. "No, this time he'll take part of your body, so he probably won't be turned into a jig, but it's still troublesome. Lord Kuna must have removed the bone from his pinky finger to leave a mark on the child. He's probably coming to pick me up tonight," the priest said, but my father's husky voice interrupted. "What will happen to my son if he says he's coming to pick me up?" The priest continued hesitantly. "That means you will become a part of Kuchi-sama. Simply put, you will be eaten. Those who can see you have corresponding powers, and you are also on the same wavelength. By absorbing that power, you will become even more powerful. I imagined myself being eaten from the head by that snake-eyed woman. Just thinking about it scared me so much that I wanted to cry out loud. But it's too early to be disheartened. I will talk to Kuchi-sama directly, so the masters should follow what I am about to say. Please listen carefully." After that, I continued to cry on my mother's lap. The priest wrapped something like a mourning string and a small talisman around the little finger of my left hand and then left. In the evening, many people gathered at my house one after another. By large crowd, I mean mostly children my age and their parents. Of course, Kanji came too. Then, with the hands of my father and mother, the children wrapped the same mourning string and talisman around the little finger of their left hand. The priest said that it was to deceive Kuna-sama's eyes. When they wrapped the string around the children in the morning, the parents bowed to the children's parents while saying something to them and returned them to their homes. Later, when I asked them what they had been talking about, my mother replied, "We asked for your cooperation so that you won't be found right away. The Lord will be visiting everyone's houses tonight, but it seems that most people can't see it. They'll all be eaten," I wrote, crying again, and asked, "Yes, children who have bones in their pinky fingers will be fine, but if you put the string on in the morning, it will be difficult to tell if the bone is there or not. So I asked them not to remove it until tomorrow morning. If it turns out that I'm hiding you on purpose, Kuna-sama will be angry." I think my mother went there to reassure me, but it made me even more anxious. If someone removes the string, will that person be the same? I wonder if my day will come off by mistake. Then night came. I had no idea when, where, or in what form Kuna-sama would appear. I was worried that the string would tighten and loosen at the slightest sound. I couldn't eat much dinner either. After dinner, I took a bath with my father. And so, the moment I opened the bathroom door, my heart froze in an instant. There was a woman in the bathtub, soaking with her back to me. A long god was floating in the bathtub like seaweed, swaying gently. She was still in the white yukata I had seen during the day. There was no doubt about it. It was Kuna-sama right in front of me. I quickly closed the wind door and began to tremble violently. My father immediately let me in. "If you run away, you'll be found out. Don't make eye contact with me under any circumstances. Don't let him know that he can see you. Daddy will protect you, so just be normal." "I'll just let you in," I whispered in my ear, and my father carried me to the bathroom. When I opened the bathroom door again, the woman's face was right in front of mine, literally in front of my nose. She had just gotten out of the bathtub, and her reptilian-like small eyes were staring fixedly at my face. The woman's voice rang in my ears from so close by. "Can you see me?" Unlike in the daytime, the woman's face wasn't smiling. She must have been annoyed after being around a few places already. I pretended not to hear and looked at my father. My father, who normally doesn't smile, suddenly smiled and said, "Hey, if there's anyone out there who wants to pee naked, you can do it here," in a voice louder than necessary. I also forced a smile with a face that looked like I was about to cry and nodded to my father. It's a dirty story, but I really had wet myself in my father's arms. After that, I did my best to wash my body as normally as possible and soak in the bathtub, but during that time, the woman was probably able to see, wasn't she? She was probably able to see, as she brought her creepy face closer to my face. Finally, the woman slowly stroked my left hand, clicked her tongue in dissatisfaction, and disappeared. My scrub was a mess with sweat, tears, and snot, but fortunately it was the bathroom, so it all washed away. Even after the woman disappeared, I was still shaking, so my father and mother took turns holding me that day. The next morning, together with the villagers who had helped us, we all climbed the mountain and visited the shrine. In the end, I was the only one who had seen Kuna-sama. The priest looked exhausted, but had a smile on his face. But it's okay now. Kuna-sama's attachment to Bono has disappeared, and it's okay to remove the string and the talisman from his little finger, he said. Similar incidents have occurred every few decades so far, and they've gotten away with this method, but it seems that in some cases, the blinding child removed the string, or the person was discovered to be able to see and was spirited away. By the way, when Kuna-sama eats them, they take the form of a giant snake and are turned into a round fruit, and there is a scroll at the shrine that depicts this. The villagers' emotions were raised, and the kanji was crying, "Thank goodness." He was happy, but we were later punished for approaching the shrine alone as children. 50 years have passed since then, and even after I grew up, the small part of my left hand has remained limp. I have never seen Kuna-sama again. When I became an adult, I had it examined at the hospital, but the doctor just shook his head. It doesn't interfere with my daily life, so it's fine. My grandfather made a scary face and told me, even though I was still a child, that I should never approach that shrine alone. The string and the talisman that were wrapped around his little finger that morning are still stored in a lucky charm bag. My grandfather is still in good health and often goes to the village senior citizens association and shows off his little finger to the new female members saying, "Oh my, you've completely charmed me." According to my grandfather, this is a surefire joke. Funeral. A few years ago, around midnight, I got a call from S, who I was dating at the time. His voice and tone sounded like he was clenching his teeth. and I couldn't quite understand what he was saying. He seemed to be outside, so I asked him to come to my house. S came by taxi. He rarely uses taxis, but even after entering the room, he didn't sit down and seemed restless. I urged him to talk slowly, and S said something like this while drinking the tea he made himself. After finishing work, eating dinner, and returning to his room, it was around 11:30. I had just eaten some yakiniku, so I wanted to take a bath as soon as possible. I put my things down in the entrance and opened the bathroom door without turning on the lights. As soon as I did, a cloud of smoke-like things fell on my face. My hand fumbled for the switch and stopped. The bathtub was covered with a black cloth. On top of that, there was a bouquet of white flowers and several lit candles. The air was filled with smoke and the smell of the flowers. In the center was a framed black and white photograph. A white, smiling face emerged in the light of the candles. Her eyes were painted black, the same color as the background. For a while I stopped thinking. Then my legs began to tremble, and thoughts started to cross my mind one after another. Questions. Who did this? When? Why? And how? The door was locked and the window was closed. So where was the person who did this? Then, from the closet, I heard a rustling sound in the darkness, like hairs falling one by one. My body started to move abruptly, and I came to my senses, my bag in hand. I grabbed it and went outside. I ran to the national highway in a frenzy and called from there. It was a bit choppy and fragmented, but if I were to summarize S's story, it was something like this. What if it was a thief? Come to think of it, I'm worried about the housework, so we decided to go to her room together. I took the ring for the servant and went up the stairs to the second floor of the 2-story apartment. I didn't hear any sound or presence in front of the room. I opened the door. I could hear the sound of someone standing there. I turned on the light and went to the bathroom. The bathroom was just as I had heard, except that the sun had disappeared and the house's eyes had been painted over with something like charcoal. It was crude and looked like a child's coloring book. I heard a scream behind me. When I left the bathroom, I found S standing in front of the open closet, his hands over his mouth. A large amount of hair had spilled onto the floor from the closet. It was a small amount. I think the amount of hair that had fallen on the road was more than enough for one adult. S was standing there with a dazed expression. For some reason, one of her legs was drawing a line. This was no joke, so I called 100 on my cell phone. That was the sound of hair falling. S was muttering in the background. I searched again and again until the police arrived. There was nothing left in the room that had been left behind. The bathroom and the area outside the closet were ransacked. There were no traces of anything, so perhaps because of this, the police only interviewed him and then left. I thought they would check for fingerprints or something, but they didn't. However, after persistently checking that the things and the large amount of hair that were left in the bathroom were not S's, they took them all away. The next day, S started staying in my room, and about 2 weeks later, we broke up. It may have been because we were spending more time together and we started to notice each other's weaknesses, but that ordinary S had clearly changed. He became moody and tended to withdraw and would only meet once a day. He would suddenly burst into tears and he would often miss work. He would skip meals, saying that whatever he ate had no taste. Sometimes when he woke up in the middle of the night, S would find him sitting at the table staring at the mirror. He had heard about S's life since they broke up through his younger brother, who was a co-worker. On the day he heard about it, his family took S to the hospital. Apparently, the tests revealed that he had cancer. By the time they found out, it was already too late, and S passed away less than a month later. He did attend the funeral. At the top of the steps was the smiling face of S. The vivid color photograph was nothing like the gloomy image of the house I had seen in the bathroom. I also admired her face. She was in good clothes and had beautiful skin. However, I was told later that this was due to the funeral parlor's restoration techniques. My sister was very thin, but when I put on makeup, I looked healthy. My brother's voice became a little tearful as he explained that he had been given makeup, and it was a side effect of the medicine. Even though a whole bunch of my hair had fallen out, the police said that S, who had only been to the house that night, had forgotten to lock the door, and someone had probably gotten in during that time. They gave me advice like, make sure to lock the door, and if possible, leave the room for a bit. But they also said to contact them if anything happened, but I couldn't call them when S had started acting strange. And it's getting a little painful to write this. I'm sorry, black person. I was overseas working on developing the utensil industry, and there was a project in a country close to where I was based at the time that we thought we could undertake, so we went there to investigate. I didn't understand the local language, so I hired an interpreter and went there with a Japanese colleague. The place was just a single-story house and a farmhouse, so it would be difficult to investigate in a day. We decided to stay overnight and lodged at a local contractor's house. During dinner, while we were talking and interpreting, the old man in the house started saying, "You know, there are black people around here." I initially thought he was referring to American companies and the like, but I didn't quite grasp what he meant. When I asked him to clarify, he explained that he didn't mean African Americans, but literally people who were black. Although his explanation might have been more detailed, my grandfather didn't care, and when a black person appeared, at the time I just thought it was some kind of legend. I can't relax unless I take a bath before going to bed, so after everyone in the house had taken a shower, I filled the bathtub with hot water around 1 a.m. and took a bath. Next to the bathroom was a large washroom where you could do laundry, separated by a frosted glass sliding door. When I looked, I saw someone moving on the other side of the frosted glass. I peered out from the bathtub and saw that his head looked black, so I thought maybe my colleague had come to take a bath too. I told him to wait a bit as I would be coming out soon, but he didn't respond and just stood there. I said, "Hey, I'm coming out now. Can you please get me a towel?" But he ignored me. I opened the sliding door myself to get a towel, but there was no one there. I thought, oh no, and looked at the door leading to the hallway, seeing the back of his head at about door height. I thought my colleague was trying to scare me, so I said, "Hey, stop messing around." I pulled the door open, and there was a child standing in the hallway. He wasn't just dark-skinned, he was completely black, like tar, and the hallway was pitch black, so I couldn't see his face very well. I screamed and fainted, and the family turned on the lights and came over. At that moment, the child was gone, but I couldn't explain the situation well, so it was all left unresolved. The next day I got curious and asked the old man what a black person was, so I returned the interpreter and asked him about the village. Apparently before the place was built, black people used to appear around there and attack people. Then a monk came, preached, and after that they stopped appearing. That's the only story I've heard. But aside from my grandfather, no one in the house seemed to know anything about it, so I still don't really understand. Temporary property. This is a story from 7 years ago, when I was still a student. I lived in this place for almost half a year after I entered university. Apparently, the apartment was double booked due to a mistake by the real estate agent, and the case went to court, so I had to move out within a certain time frame. The real estate agent came to apologize with a gift and said he would find a vacant apartment that met my criteria within the time frame. However, due to bad timing or bad luck, I couldn't find a place that met my criteria by the deadline, so I had to move out. I think the real estate agent was pretty anxious too. It was very close, so he said, "I'll find one within a month, so I'd like you to live here temporarily for now." And he introduced me to a rental apartment that I couldn't afford with the rent I was paying. The building was a bit old, probably about 30 years old, but it had 2 rooms, and the bathroom and toilet were separate, so it was in a pretty good location. It seemed too convenient for me, so I was initially suspicious of the property, but the real estate agent assured me it wasn't the case. However, he warned me that the area was a little unsafe at night, so I should avoid going out as much as possible. I wondered if there were thugs living nearby, but it was only for about a month, so I thought I could stay with a friend if it got really bad. However, as soon as I moved in, I found out that there were indeed some strange occurrences, and it was a dangerous place. I noticed there was no cat in the room. There were a lot of unsettling things happening, so I was worried about what to do. I noticed it on the second day after I moved in. Despite people living on other floors, there seemed to be no one else living on my floor. One day, when I got to my floor by elevator, I heard a cat meowing. It seemed to be coming from the space where the fire extinguisher with the emergency bell was located, so I looked inside, thinking it might have been locked in, but there was nothing there. Once on the 23rd, in the middle of the night, I heard a dragging sound coming from the ceiling. At first, I thought it was the sound of someone living on the floor above me, but it seemed to be coming from the attic. Apparently, when I got off the elevator on my floor, I sometimes felt a strong gaze suddenly. Of course, when I looked around, there was no one there. When I woke up in the morning, I saw a man in a suit standing on the balcony through a gap in the curtains. Wondering what was going on, I opened the curtains and found no one there. When I went out to the balcony, his leather shoes were lined up. I looked down thinking, "Are you serious?" But there was no sign of anyone having fallen. When I returned my gaze to my feet, the leather shoes had disappeared. I have seen many strange occurrences like this. There were times when I heard high heels clicking alone on the floor, whether inside or outside. When I went out and came back, there was water in the bathroom and a strong smell of perfume had built up inside. Sometimes I could hear a woman laughing from the stairs next to the elevator, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It sounded crazy. Around 3 a.m. on weekends, I could always hear some kind of weird footsteps outside. When I was on the phone in my room, the line would get chaotic and I could hear what sounded like a squelch. This continued on, so after a week of living there, I finally called the real estate agency to complain. The agent apologized, saying that if I didn't go out late at night, it wasn't likely to happen and asked me to hold on a little longer. I knew it probably wouldn't change, so I thought I'd just have to be patient for another 2-3 weeks. I'm usually optimistic about these sorts of things, so I didn't worry too much. However, there were 2 incidents that really scared me. Once, when I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I found an old lady sitting at the entrance. The door was supposed to be auto-locked, but I was so scared. When I called out to her, she said, "Hey, you're here, waiting for me?" When I replied, "No," she smiled and said she would wait there without listening. The door wouldn't open, so I had no choice but to call the police and have them take her away. After a while, the police came and persuaded the old woman to go outside. But as soon as they closed the door, they started banging on it with great force and screaming for the old man to be given back. I was so shocked that I opened the door and found the old woman with her eyes rolled back in her head, being held by 3 police officers. I still remember the terrible way the old woman ran. The other incident was on the day I was contacted by the real estate agent, who said he had finally found an apartment I could move into. It was a Sunday, so I didn't have school, and I was just packing my things after I got the call when I heard a rustling noise coming from the entrance. I went to the entrance and opened the door to find a cardboard box about 30 centimeters in size. It felt suspicious, but I brought it inside, and when I opened the box, I found a very dirty wooden carved doll-like thing inside, with an inscription on the back saying it was a doll that would bring happiness or something. It felt creepy, so I put the doll back in the box, took it outside the entrance, and resumed packing. Then I heard another rustling noise coming from the entrance. I opened the door again and found hair on the box from before. I looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. By this time, I had become quite accustomed to the strange happenings in this apartment building, so I thought, huh? And went back to packing without paying it much attention. However, this time I heard a knock on the door. At first I ignored it, but it was so persistent that I decided to check. I opened the front door and wanted to yell at whoever it was, but I stopped when I put my hand on the door. I can't really explain why, but I felt something really unpleasant on the other side of the door. I really can't explain it well, but I felt like my whole body was unsettled. Still, I was curious about what was outside, so I cautiously peeked through the peephole. There was a woman in her early to mid-20s standing there. She was extremely skinny, her hair was messy, and both of her hands were wrapped in bandages. When I tried to look away from the peephole, she brought her face close to it, peering in with clear, bear-like eyes, and asked me, "Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy?" I was so surprised and exhausted by her actions that I fell backwards and stayed there for a while. But she probably stayed glued to the door for about an hour, continuing to ask, "Are you happy?" After I could no longer hear her voice, I looked back through the peephole. But the woman was gone, and the box with the doll in it had also disappeared. 2 days after this incident, I moved out of the apartment and into a proper place. I told the real estate agent all about it and asked what it all meant, but he said he didn't know the details. It was only about 2 years ago that strange events started occurring frequently. It wasn't originally a place with a reputation for strange rumors, suicides, murders, or anything like that. But then one day, strange events suddenly started occurring frequently, and within 6 months, the people living on that floor of the apartment ran away. New tenants who moved in also left soon after. Now, it seems they aren't even looking for tenants unless you are in a desperate situation like I was. By the way, the reason they warned me not to go out in the middle of the night was because the previous tenant had been chased by something, fell down the stairs, and was followed to a rather strange address. The testimony of the injured person was so confusing and incomprehensible that they never found out who it was. That's the end of my story. By the way, the apartment the real estate agent introduced to me was just an ordinary place with nothing special about it. I got a discount because of all the trouble, and I was able to live comfortably until graduation. About that apartment, I happened to be passing by nearby 2 years ago, so I stopped by. When I went there, it had been completely demolished and turned into a parking lot. The water in the wash basin was so bad. When I moved into a 10-story apartment building, I noticed it seemed old, but the interior had been renovated and looked as clean as new. Since it was a cheap property, I quickly decided to sign the contract and moved in. However, Not everything was perfect. The air felt a bit stagnant. The water initially smelled bad, and visibility was poor. Because the place was old, I guess the pipes were outdated. I installed a water filter for the kitchen faucet and managed by buying mineral water for drinking. But what bothered me the most was the bath water. Usually I just took showers, so it wasn't too bad. But occasionally when I filled the bathtub for a relaxing bath, I noticed the water smelled a bit fishy, which ruined the experience. For a moment I wondered if there was a dead body in the water tank on the roof, but since the first to third floors of the building were used by businesses, the water tank seemed well maintained. After that, whenever I wanted to soak in the bathtub, I had to add some hot spring base, which helped mask the smell a bit. One day, I noticed something strange. I take a shower every morning, but there was always a lot of water piling up in the sink in the bathroom corner. I thought maybe I had forgotten to throw out the water from the previous bath, so I just disposed of the water and took my shower. However, it started happening more frequently, so I became suspicious. At first, I thought I might have just forgotten to empty the sink, but then I considered that the water might be accumulating from various places during my shower and just happened to flow into the sink. There is indeed a tray on top of the sink for items like shampoo and body wash, but no matter how I thought about it, there was no way the water there could fill the sink. So I started checking whether the sink was empty every time I finished my shower and left the bathroom. One day, I noticed water still in the sink and decided to investigate further. I found a cheap waterproof video camera for sale secondhand, bought it, set up a tripod in the bathroom, and recorded the water level in the sink. I decided to film how water accumulated in the sink. I applied anti-fog on the lens, left the bathroom light on, pointed the camera at the sink, and started recording. I then headed to work. That day, I worked overtime and ended up staying quite late. When I got home, the first thing I did was check the bathroom, and I saw that water had accumulated in the sink. Excited to have finally captured the mysterious event on video, I retrieved the footage and decided to watch it on TV. The video was fairly long, so I planned to take my time and fast forward through it. When I started the video and got up to make a cup of coffee, I was shocked. There was no need to wait that long. Only a few seconds into the video, a long, thin arm, like a back scratcher or a mummy's hand, appeared from the bottom of the screen, from the bathroom doorway. It looked hard, dried out and wrinkled, almost like a toy. A stiff, straight, thin arm was hanging over the sink, spreading its tiny fingers and trying to grab it. Then it clumsily brought the sink under the sink and, clumsily again, opened the tap to turn on the water, slowly filling the sink with water. Watching this in shock, I couldn't stop trembling. This mysterious arm, whose identity I didn't know, reached out to me. It should have still been in the room. It was only a few seconds after I left the bathroom. I was still there, getting ready to go to work. I was watching the video in a daze, forgetting to even blink, when suddenly the video went blank and the screen went black. I came back to my senses and looked at the video camera, which had lost power and was dripping water. Water was dripping from inside the camera, which was supposed to be waterproof. Standing there in the middle of the room, hands together, I tried to pretend to chant in supplication. I was so scared. It's too late now. I'm sure it's still in this room. I don't know what to do. I decided to take refuge at a friend's house for the time being. After that, I immediately prepared to move and now live in a different apartment. What on earth was that thin arm? The apartment is still there, and someone must be living in that room. It's just a matter of whether you notice it or not. Everyone, please be careful with the water in your wash basin. Please be cautious with your living arrangements.